It's so simple, just 2 chords, take it to another place. The second you get it, just join us.
I love that song. Rabbi Shlomo Katz of Efrat, Israel. I mean, he's just one of my favorite people in the whole world. We've had him here on the show when he's been touring in the United States. That record is Shlomo Katz live in Melbourne. Nina and I just love it. And that song is the Rova Chuppah Nigun. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? It's great to be with you. My energy's not bad, considering I've been fasting all day. This is one of the minor fasts in the Jewish calendar. It's called Tzom Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, the Hebrew month of Tammuz. It's actually a terrible date in Jewish history. On this date, the walls of Jerusalem were breached and the final siege began, which led to the destruction of the temple. And so we fast on this day and we enter this 3 weeks of heightened sensitivity when the new month of Av begins in about a week and a half. Then we start counting the 9 days until the 9th day of Av, Tisha B'Av, when, we really cry. We cry and lament that the temple was destroyed. So today we're fasting to begin that period of commemoration. Who is with us? Who's in the house with us today? Hold on. Let's light up the darkness. Especially on this day, a fast day, the 17th of Av. Let us light up the darkness. And that is the best way to ameliorate our pain, is to bring Torah and wisdom and goodness and light into the world. Yehudit Sobel is in the house saying shalom from Florence, South Carolina. James Roth says shalom from Indianapolis. Melissa Iteljurin from Great Neck, New York, wishing us shalom and a good evening. Bill Eldridge from the Graduate Theological Union at Berkeley. Ricky Keith says shalom from Boca Raton, Florida. Lucy Ram Johnson, good evening from Minneapolis. We are truly a classroom around the world and certainly across the country. Jeffrey King, shalom from Hollywood, Florida. Suzanne Abdul Dahab, you see what I mean? Across the world, Suzanne is with us from Egypt and saying Boker Tov, good morning in Egypt. Kathy Roy says Oklahoma. Ronnie Robbins tuning in from Atlanta. Sa Hind says salam. Salam to you, my friend. Ed Berg says shalom from Galloway, New Jersey. Robin Stewart is in the house from Ohio. Sharon Frant Brooks from Lebanon, New Jersey. She says shalom. Nachi Hellman is in from Muncie. Muncie's in the house. Brandon Christian Sullivan, hello from Knoxville. Nancy Cavillones from Los Gatos, California. Devorah Rosenblum says shalom from South Bend, Indiana. Gloria Beck from Dallas, Texas. Leslie Ann Landsberg, shalom from Texas. And Susan Rochelle Brewer from Maryland. And Sharon Franbrook says, hope you're having an easy fast. I guess yours has ended. You're on the East Coast. And Neil is with us from Virginia. All right, let me contextualize where we are, what page we are, and then before I go on to continue our learning, I'm going to say a few words in response to a little controversy that erupted in the comments yesterday about, some people like to slam the Talmud as if the Talmud has evil teachings in it. All right, and it does not, and I'm going to address that in just a moment. So first, let's just contextualize where we are. We are in Tractate Shabbos. Today, our daf is page 125, Kuf Chaf Hey. We're in chapter 17, which is all about the concept of muktzeh, things which are set aside, either they're prepared for use on Shabbos or they're set aside from use. That's what muktzeh means, set aside from use. There's certain things that we don't use on Shabbos, and so we don't touch them on Shabbos. We've been studying that principle and how it's a rabbinic decree that protects us from coming to violate Shabbos accidentally, as it were. It's a fence around the Torah. But there's exceptions to the rule of muktzeh, as we've been discussing. And basically, as we learned yesterday, the teaching of Rava with respect to vessels and with most objects, that if something is designed for an action which is permitted on Shabbos, so then we can pick up that item, right? Like a knife and fork. Those are designed for eating, which of course is allowed on Shabbos. And so we can pick up a knife and fork in order to eat with it. We can pick up the knife and fork because we need its place. It's lying in a spot on the table where I want to put something else there. That means we need its place. Or we can actually move the object in order to preserve the object from damage. If it's designed for a use, an activity that is permitted on Shabbos, so we can pick up that item. We have greater liberty with that item, not just to pick it up to use it for a permitted use, not just to pick it up for its place, but even to pick it up to preserve it from damage, either from sun damage or from theft or some other form of damage. If the object is primarily intended for an activity that is prohibited on Shabbos. So now think about power tools or a socket wrench or, carpenter's tools. Of course, the activity that those tools are designed for is prohibited on Shabbos. It's construction. We don't construct a building. We don't work on anything. We don't do any kind of creative labor. But construction is definitely one of those 39 categories of labor that are prohibited on Shabbos. So you would think we would not pick up those tools at all. But we've learned that even if it's designed for an activity that's prohibited on Shabbos, we can pick up the tool if we need its place. And we can even pick up the tool to use it for an activity that is permitted on Shabbos. And the example I gave yesterday was a socket wrench. If I can be clever and actually use the socket wrench just to pry a top off a beer bottle, that's going to be a permitted use. It's not what it's designed for. Heaven knows you wouldn't buy a $50 socket wrench to use as a bottle opener, but it can be used that way in a pinch. And by the way, on the subject of opening bottles on Shabbos, I just said that off the top of my head, and I wanted to make sure I was right. I looked it up, and there is a little bit of a question with opening bottles. Excuse me. It is definitely okay to open a beer bottle on Shabbos. You can do that because that bottle, after you're done with it, you throw it away, right? The bottle was totally subservient to the beer inside. The bottle only exists to deliver the beer to me. The question is a little trickier with a water bottle. Like, for example, a plastic water bottle that, like when you buy disposable water bottles, they're disposable. But those plastic bottles that have a plastic top, and when you unscrew them, it leaves a little ring around, below the rim of the opening. And now you've unscrewed it, and now you can drink your water. And most people will throw that bottle away because, we're wasteful and we live in a rich country where we don't think twice about throwing away plastic bottles, even though it's terrible for the environment, etc. But those plastic bottles could easily be used as reusable bottles. I mean, they're lightweight, they're not great quality, but I'm sure it's happened to you too, that you've had a plastic bottle, you emptied it, and then you put more water in it. So that's a little bit problematic because when you unscrew the top, you're actually completing the job of turning this bottle into a vessel, right? It wasn't a vessel before. Before it was just the packaging to bring me some water that I could drink on Shabbos. But if I have any intent of now reusing that bottle, then when I opened it is when I completed the process of making a reusable water bottle available to me. So that gets a little bit tricky. If for sure you're planning to throw it away, then you don't have to think twice about opening it. And there are some differences when it's a metal top and it leaves that metal ring on the bottle. I'm not going to get into that now because it's not what we're talking about today. But if you have a question about opening bottles and what's permitted on Shabbos and you want to learn a little bit more about it, just Google halacha of opening bottles on Shabbos. But for the beer bottle, no problem. You can pry off the top, drink your beer, and not worry about it for a moment. Okay, so now we're going to get into some more nuances of muktzeh, what's allowed and what is not, and what happens with respect to garbage, and if we throw something in the garbage on Shabbos. I'm going to get to that in one moment. Now, yesterday, there was some conversation going on in the comments during the show, and I didn't see it until later, and then I saw the question was referred to me, but it was near the end of the show, and it was so off topic that I wasn't going to get into it. And I'm not going to do a whole class on this question now. But suffice it to say that since we launched Accidental Talmudist, which is about the Talmud, obviously, from time to time we get trolled. And when I say trolled is when they're trying to be malicious. When people just have an honest question, then that's not trolling at all. That's wonderful that people are asking us the questions. And I believe the person who asked the questions yesterday was not trolling us, was just asking the question because he wanted to know. So, from time to time, you can go out there, God forbid, in the internet, and there's all kinds of sites that are generally quite anti-Semitic and Jew-hating in origin and in orientation. And they will say, well, Jews, they believe in this book called the Talmud, and the Talmud is an evil book because it has all kinds of terrible things in it, including that adult men can have sexual relations with children. It says that in the book, and that's the proof that this whole religion and the Jewish people are horrible, evil people. All right, so this is just a lie. Flat out, it's a lie. Now, there are certain references that talk about this subject and require a little bit more understanding and knowledge to understand what is being talked about so that it's not confusing. It's not that surprising that some confusion exists about this subject, but of course, and this is a good lesson that extends beyond this particular subject, don't go accusing somebody about what they say and what they do and what they believe based on, 30 seconds that you spent reading an accusation about them without any deeper understanding, because, you could so easily miss the mark, and that is especially true on this subject. So, just to be super clear, Judaism it exists around the Torah. Okay, the Torah brought into the world that we must protect the widow and the orphan, and that stands as a category for the powerless and the disenfranchised. We have an obligation to God to take care of God's creatures that need protection. So, no way would we ever condone child abuse of any sort. No way. Hurting a child that way is so beyond evil, and it has to be stopped and the people punished and everything done. In addition to that, we have an age-old principle called Dina de Malchuta Dina, meaning the law of the land applies to us. Okay, so if you live in a country where, anything, like for example, if you live in a place where a certain drug is illegal, so you are bound by that law. Even if you're a Jew and we also have a Jewish law that we have to follow, we're bound by the law of the land. We must follow the laws of the nation in which we live. So all the laws that apply to everyone else around us apply to us too, per the command of our sages that we are bound by the laws of the land that we live in. Now, to get more specific on this subject, and again, I'm not going to do a whole class on it, I'm going to just do this very quickly, but when this question comes up, so there is a reference, it's in Tractate Ketubot, Daf 11, page 11 there, and it says, that if, it sounds horrible, right? So that if a man, it actually starts with a woman. If a woman has sex with a boy, depending on the age of the boy, either something has happened or something hasn't happened. And then it also says about a man, an adult man, has relations with a child, with a girl child. Now, the reason that they're getting into that, and they're going on a very technical point, but the purpose of the law that is being discussed there is saying that if the child is so young, when this abuse happened, that because she's so young, her status hasn't changed. In other words, even though she was raped by this monster who raped her, she's still a virgin. And the law was meant to protect the child from having that status change, because there are certain subgroups among the Jews, the Kohanim, the priests. They are not allowed to marry anyone who's not a virgin. This doesn't matter so much now, but when the temple was standing, for a priest to serve in the temple, he had to satisfy certain conditions. The priest had to be of a minimum age and under a maximum age. He couldn't marry a divorced woman. That would disqualify him. If he had certain kinds of injuries on his own body, he would be disqualified from serving as a priest. And he had to marry a virgin. That's part of the deal to be a certain kind of priest in the temple. So that law that was being discussed there is that which says that if the man has sex with the child, it's considered as if nothing has happened, is not in any way condoning the act of rape. It's protecting the child and saying that nothing happened to her in terms of her status hasn't changed. Of course she needs counseling. Of course the perpetrator needs to be punished. Of course he should be driven from this world for taking advantage of a child like that. But when somebody pulls that little piece of law out of context and says, well, you see, the Talmud condones pedophilia, it's laughable if it wasn't so tragic that these laws are used, taken out of context, taken out of their nuance and their depth, and misused in that way. Hopefully wait, hold on a second. I just got a note. I think Nina's saying with regard to the Kohanim, the rules are still valid for sure, and they don't do it. But some people will violate that rule. You know, if they were trying to serve in the temple, they'd probably be more careful never to violate the rule. And with regard to a virgin, it might be the Kohen Gadol who's bound in that way. I'd have to look it up. The point is, the laws were taken out of context and used to make a slur on the Jewish people and on the Torah and the Talmud, which in many ways is sort of like the central pillar of Judaism. The Torah is the center of Judaism, but as you've seen in our class, every day we expound on the Torah to try to understand how the laws in the Torah apply in our lives. And that's what the Talmud is all about. All right, enough of a digression. I just thought I should address that since it came up yesterday. Back to the concept of muktzeh, right? So the general idea, I said chapter 17 is about the concept of muktzeh, items which are set aside. But if we step back even a little further, we're talking about Shabbos. We're talking about making Shabbos special. We're talking about protecting ourselves from coming to violate a Torah prohibition, sure, but we're also creating that palace in time, right? So much of this is about creating that palace in time, which is Shabbos. And we cut off the work week, and then we enter this new and sacred and beautiful space. And all these rules, which can seem so technical and picayune, in a totality, serve to create it's almost like a magical space, a magical island in time. It's not magical, it's holy, it's sacred, it's spiritual. It's not magical because it was given to us by God. By honoring these rules in their total, we really set ourselves up to enter that sacred island in time each week. Okay, so with regard to muktzeh, as we recall, so we said like the socket wrench, which would normally be muktzeh, we can pick it up for its place or to open the beer bottle. So now we can touch that thing. But some items are just going to remain muktzeh no matter what. Even if we can figure out that there's something permitted that we would be able to do with them, we're not going to do that. We're going to leave those items alone and not touch them all through Shabbos. One reason was because the item, it's been set aside for fear of financial loss. A few days ago, we talked about the spice merchant's hammer. He would not use that hammer to crack nuts, right? Like you can take a regular hammer from your toolbox. You can't use that on Shabbos to hammer nails. That's prohibited. But you could use it to crack walnuts, which is not its intended purpose as a hammer, but it's very effective at cracking walnuts, and we can do that. But the spice merchant's hammer, we would not do that with, because the spice merchant is very particular about his hammer. He doesn't want any other foods getting into that hammer, which could corrupt the taste and the smell of the spices that he sells. He's very particular about that hammer, and so in his mind, in his consciousness, as he heads into Shabbos, that hammer is not prepared. The spice merchant's hammer is not prepared for use on Shabbos. It is set aside. He would never use it on Shabbos for some other purpose, and so we don't use it for some other purpose. Likewise is the category of repulsive things, repulsiveness. So what's in our garbage can, right, when Shabbat begins, we put it in the garbage can because we threw it out. We don't want to use it. It's garbage to us. And once it's in the garbage can, it mixed with other garbage. We don't care because it's garbage. So the stuff in the garbage can is set aside as repulsive. We're not going to go later into the garbage can on Shabbos. If we thought, oh, there's something I shouldn't have thrown it away, okay, so wait till after Shabbos to pull it out. Now, we've been talking about the fifth Mishnah, which we're discussing now. We've been talking about vessels and their shards, right? So broken vessels. What about using the pieces of broken vessels on Shabbos? And what we learned yesterday is that per the opinion of Rava, if the shards have some kind of a use, so then we can move them. Vessels are always prepared for Shabbos. Any kind of a receptacle you can move and use on Shabbos. It's prepared for Shabbos. And even broken vessels, if they have some kind of a use. Rabbi Yehuda would say only if the use of the broken piece is similar to the original use of the vessel that it came from. But the rabbis say, no, we're not going to be that strict. As long as it's useful for something, then we can use it on Shabbos. So the question comes up, well, what about if a vessel broke and you threw it into the garbage during Shabbos? Now this is different. If it was in the garbage can before Shabbos began, then in our consciousness, in the back of our mind anyway, if we weren't thinking about it so intentionally, nevertheless, in our general consciousness, it went in the garbage because we didn't plan to use it or see it again. During Shabbos, if we throw something in the garbage, or let's say in a garbage dump is the example given in our daf, we might have made a mistake, right? We might have not intentionally thrown it down. The question is, does it now become part of the garbage and we can't pick it up again? And the answer is no, because when Shabbat came in, it wasn't in the garbage. When Shabbat started, that object was prepared for use on Shabbos. So even though I might have dropped it, and let's say I dropped it by mistake into the garbage, it doesn't suddenly become off limits. I could pull it back out of the garbage. And Rav Papa gives the example of somebody's walking along. Let's say his coat is over his shoulder because there's an Erev, he's carrying his coat, or maybe even it's his cloak and it's on him, but a big wind comes and blows it off his body and it lands in a garbage dump. Can he not get his coat back from the garbage dump, says Rav Papa? Of course he can. His clothing was prepared for use on Shabbos. It only ended up in the garbage dump by mistake. It wasn't intentional. Even if he did it on purpose and then regretted it, this object, this cloak, was prepared for use on Shabbos when Shabbos began, so he can retrieve it from the dump, even if it falls in. It all has to do with what was our intention for the object at the outset of Shabbos. With respect to torn clothing, right? So obviously a cloak, all our clothes are prepared for use on Shabbos. All our clothes are prepared because we might change our clothes several times. We don't have to think, I'm going to, this particular item in my closet I'm going to wear, or, let's say I have like another closet in another part of my house or in the shed, in the yard, and like that's like deep storage, and I never really go in there. I had no specific contemplation that I was going to wear those clothes this Shabbos. But then I changed my mind during Shabbos. So you know what? I think for lunch today I want to wear this thing I haven't worn in years. Can I wear it? Yes, because all our clothes are prepared for Shabbos use as long as they're on our property. We don't have to carry them in, as it were. But what about torn clothing, right? What about scraps of cloth that come from clothing that's fallen apart? Are those prepared for use on Shabbos? Now it's different because scraps of clothing, scraps of cloth that have been torn off of our clothes, they're not prepared for use on Shabbos as clothing because they're no longer clothing. They're just scraps. But they are prepared for use because any scrap of cloth could be used as a rag. And we can use a rag on Shabbos, right? It's limited how much cleaning we're going to do, for sure. We don't want to get involved in work. But just as we can wash our dishes with cold water so that we can use them again, we can wash the Friday night dishes for Saturday lunch, right? We can wash our dishes and use them again. Likewise, we can wipe down the table. We're going to be careful about how we do it. But a rag has a use on Shabbos. If the rag is so small that it's less than 3 finger breadths wide, so then no one's going to use that as a rag. And once it's that small, it's smaller than the minimum measure, and then it's considered muktzeh. No one would really have in mind to use this little scrap that is smaller than 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, so that's considered muktzeh. What about a scrap of cloth that is torn from something that was holy? Perhaps from the garment of a priest that wore it in the temple, or in modern times from a Torah cover or from a tefillin bag, right? So a cloth that was used as some kind of adornment or accessory to a sacred object. What about those scraps? And the answer there is, those are muktzeh, because we wouldn't make a rag out of some cloth that was once used for a Torah cover, right? We have respect for the dignity of this object because it was associated with holiness, and we wouldn't take something that was once associated with the holy and now use it as a cleaning product. And it's a good lesson that we often hear in our journey through the Talmud. If we're going to respect a scrap of cloth because it was associated with holiness, how much more must we respect and show consideration for a person who is holy in himself or herself and is a creation and the highest of creations of the Holy One, blessed be He. If we're going to be considerate, right, of just a scrap of cloth, we're certainly going to be considerate so much more of people. That brings us to another kind of vessel that leads to an argument among the sages, and this has to do with So we've talked about a clay pot, right? And so with a clay pot is a vessel. A vessel is prepared for use on Shabbos. If it breaks, the shards of the clay pot, if they're large enough, they can still be used as a vessel. So even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that those are prepared for use on Shabbos. If it's smaller than that, the rabbis say you can use those shards from a clay pot to be a lid, let's say on a glass of water. But Rabbi Yehuda would say you can't use it because it doesn't have the same purpose as the original vessel that it came from. Now we come to the special case of the clay oven. So in Talmudic times, an oven was not, a metal box with either electric or gas power in the kitchen. An oven was much more like a clay chimenea that you may have seen. Some people have them in their yards. It's kind of like more typical in Mexico. But it's a large clay vessel, a large clay oven. And usually the form that it took is just kind of a large dome, and it would be attached to the ground, attached to some kind of a foundation or to the ground itself, but it would be mortared around the rim of this. Think of it like an igloo. It's sort of like an igloo, like a dome, upside down on the ground. It has an opening with a door in it, and then it's attached to the ground so that the heat inside stays inside, right? So they're gonna build a wood fire inside of it, and then they'll attach like dough to the sides of the oven, or put in some kind of iron plate with food, or iron pot with food that's going to be cooked in there. So that's an oven. What happens if we have a broken oven? What is a broken oven? Is it a vessel, in which case the vessel and its shards are prepared for use on Shabbos as long as the shards are useful for something? Or is this not a vessel, because a clay oven is not a receptacle, meant to hold other things, right? It's an appliance. It's an appliance. And in its normal use, it is attached to the ground. And so that gives it a different status than just a clay pot, which would definitely be a vessel. So what is the law with respect to the oven? This is going to be a little bit different. Rav Yehuda, so that's the difference. So Rava says, right, the clay oven is not a vessel. Because it's not a vessel, the law is going to be different. And so since it's not a vessel, its shards, if the oven broke, what's left of it is not the shards of a vessel. Rather, it's its own thing. It's an oven. The rabbis say it is an oven, and it may be moved so long as it can still function as an oven. Right? So the oven was meant to be attached to the ground and used as an oven. Okay, let's say it broke, somehow it became detached. It's still a large dome, but it's no longer attached to the ground. So the rabbis are going to say, okay, you can move it. You can move this thing because it's not attached to the ground. You're not detaching it from the ground. It's movable. And it is essentially a shard of what the oven was when it was attached to the ground. So it's a shard of an oven. A broken oven or a detached oven is now considered like a shard of an oven. And we're going to be able to move it and not consider it muktzeh as long as there's the possibility, and we're not going to cook on Shabbos, obviously, but in terms of whether we can move it or not, if it's big enough that it could still be used to heat up food inside. If it's smaller than that, so then it's essentially going to be, the unusable shard of an oven, not the usable shard of a vessel. Rabbi Yehuda is just going to be a little bit more stringent. He's going to say it has to be big enough and whole enough that if you put it over a pit and made a fire in the pit, and then this thing was on top of the pit, and you just put some rocks around it, that it would be whole enough that the top of it would get hot, right? So it's still pretty close to the oven that it was, according to Rabbi Yehuda. The rabbis say if it's even possible to get some heat going in there and keep heat enough in there long enough that something could cook, even if the top of the oven didn't get hot, then we could move it on Shabbos. It wouldn't be muktzeh. That completes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. I'm going to introduce Mishnah number 6, and then I'll get to your comments and questions. Mishnah number 6 talks about 3 special cases. The first is a stone that is in a gourd that is used to draw water. Okay, what is a gourd? A gourd is a vegetable, but when you hollow it out and let it dry, it can become a musical instrument. Wasn't planning on this, but I'm kind of into percussion, and I have this. This is a gourd. As you can see, this was once a vegetable, and it was hollowed out. This one is used as an instrument, but you could use this as a container for water. So now just imagine you have this gourd and it's being used, let's say it has a wider opening, and you're going to lower it into a well to get water. You're going to need some weight inside the gourd so that it can get tipped down and get low enough in the water so that water will flow into it. So the question is about this rock that's inside the gourd, so that when we lower it into the well, like there's a rope attached to the gourd, right? We lower it into the well, we want it to fill up with water. This rock is inside it to give it some weight. The question is the rock attached to the gourd, or at least positioned within it in such a way that it is unlikely to fall out of the gourd? If the rock is attached to the gourd, no problem. Now it's not a rock anymore, it's just part of the gourd. If it's inside the gourd and is unlikely to fall out when we lower it into the water, it's the same as being part of the gourd. But if the rock could easily fall out of the gourd, now we have a different situation. It's not part of the gourd. We're trying to use that as a convenience, but in fact what we did is we picked up a rock, which is muktzeh, on Shabbos. We don't pick up sticks and twigs and branches and rocks and dirt from the ground. We don't need those things on Shabbos, and they're muktzeh. Dirt, sometimes we can pick up to cover filth. We can do that. But generally speaking, twigs and rocks are muktzeh. We don't pick them up from the ground on Shabbos. So this rock, which is muktzeh, and now I put it in the gourd, now it hasn't become part of the gourd. This is actually where the gourd is acting as a vessel for the rock. It's a base for the rock, and now the gourd and the rock are off limits. I shouldn't have picked up that at all. Right? So if you needed a rock to be inside a gourd so that you could put it into the well, you should create that situation before Shabbos begins and make sure that the rock is firmly in the gourd. It's somehow attached, or it's a big enough rock that it's not going to come out. However you've arranged it, the rock has to become part of the gourd so that it isn't that the gourd is a base for the rock. This applies in a bigger way. If you think about, okay, a rock, muktzeh, I don't pick up rocks. What if I rested a rock on a barrel of wine on Friday before Shabbos began? I wasn't thinking about it. I had a rock in my hand. I just put it down on the nearest surface. It ended up on a wine barrel. And now I want to get at the wine, and I have to move the barrel. I have to move the barrel so I can get at the wine. But this rock is on top of the barrel. That rock is muktzeh. The barrel, it's a barrel of wine. But now that barrel of wine has become a base for this rock that happens to be resting on top of it. And we actually have a problem. We can't pick up the barrel. But the rabbis found a way to handle this situation. We can't pick up the rock to take it off the barrel so we can move the barrel. And we can't really pick up the barrel, which has the rock on it, because now the barrel is a base for the rock. But I can kind of shake the barrel. And if the rock falls off, okay. Now the rock fell off. Now I can take the barrel over where I need it to go so I can get at the wine. And that is a backhanded way of moving the muktzeh rock. Instead of picking up the rock, which I can't do, by shaking the barrel, it's an atypical manner of moving the rock off of its base. And that is allowed. The exception to the exception is going to be if before Shabbos I wasn't so thoughtless, it wasn't, that I just, without even thinking about it, rested that rock on the barrel. If I actually purposely put the rock on the barrel, saying like, oh, it looks good there, that's its place. And I just didn't think that I might need that barrel. I just viewed that barrel. It's been sitting around for a while, so it's just going to acting like a side table next to my couch. And yeah, I like this rock. It's a beautiful rock. I'm going to just put it there, and it'll be like a decoration on my barrel, which is really just a side table. Then Shabbos begins. And then I think, oh my gosh, a lot of people came, more than I expected. We need more wine. Oh, let's open up that barrel. But now that barrel, consciously, when I set that rock on it before Shabbos began, thinking it was just a side table, I made that barrel into a base for a muktzeh item. So now I got to just leave it there during Shabbos. Maybe I can open the barrel from the bottom, but I'm not going to be able to move the barrel or the rock. And this idea of intention, it really matters. And now we get into a little story where they explore it at a bit of a deeper level. And they, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, follow their regular line of reasoning as when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, and he said that Rabbi Hanina said, and some say that it was Rabbi Zera who said, that Rabbi Hanina said, that there happened an incident involving Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Now we're going to get into the story. And what this story is about is what was my intention regarding an object before Shabbat began. Did I just have to have it in my mind, or is it more than that? Does it have to be does it have to be that I had to take some kind of an action? Like if I put that rock on the barrel saying, okay, this can rest here, that was an action. So with an action, I showed that my intent was that that table would be a base for that rock. What about if I just thought about it, right? And that's what this story is about. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi went to one place and he found a course of building stones. So you can imagine there was a construction project next door to the house where Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was spending Shabbos with his students, right? So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, he was the head of the sages. He would travel with an entourage. So he had a bunch of his students with him. They were staying, let's say, by the home of a very rich man who could put up not only the rabbi, but also all his students. And maybe even the rich man himself had, he was building a guest house, right? So there was some construction. Obviously, his workers are not working on Shabbos, but the building materials are still on the property. And one of the things of those building materials is a bunch of rocks. They were going to build, let's say, that guest house out of stone, and all these stones are sitting around outside. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is thinking, okay, tomorrow on Shabbos, we're going to have, we're going to learn Torah together, me and all the students, and there's going to be more people coming. The locals, they're going to want to hear the teaching as well. So we're going to need more seats even than this rich gentleman has. We have to sort of set up a little, ersatz auditorium, right? We're going to need seats for everybody. So what did Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi do? He said to his students, go out and think that you are designating these stones for Shabbos so that we may sit on them tomorrow on Shabbos. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi did not require them to perform an action with those stones, right? So according to this story, he told his students, just go out there and think to yourself, we're going to sit on those tomorrow. So now, instead of acting as just stones that are going to be building materials for making a house, we are going to repurpose them on Shabbos, for Shabbos, as chairs, right? And we said already, rocks are muktzeh. They're not utensils and they're not vessels. They're just rocks, even if they're going to be built into a house. So he told his students, go out there and think to yourself, we're going to sit on those tomorrow, and then they'll be prepared for Shabbos so we can sit on them. Rabbi Yochanan said, you're telling that story completely wrong. You missed the whole point. This is not what happened. Rather, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi required his students to perform an action to designate the stones. And the Gemara asks, what action did he say to them to perform? And Rabbi Ami said that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said to them, go out and arrange the stones, right? The stones are all in a pile to be built into walls for the house that they're building. You go arrange them in a semicircle around the speaker, and everyone will see, oh, okay, those stones for this Shabbos have been repurposed as seats. Rabbi Asi said that he said to them, go out and rub the mortar off of the stones. In other words, actually transform the stones a little bit, make them a little more comfortable, just chip away some of the mortar that might have splashed on them. In other words, a more definite act, not just moving them and arranging them in a certain way, but even adjusting the rocks themselves a little bit to demonstrate that we are preparing for Shabbos and we're preparing those rocks for use on Shabbos. Why would something like this be necessary? Minimally just to think about using them, but more likely, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that a specific action was taken to prepare those rocks for use on Shabbos, because if they didn't take that action, the rocks would not be prepared for use on Shabbos, and we would not be able to sit on them on Shabbos. Let me just check my notes. So what is it, right? What is it about these rocks that makes them different than the socket wrench, right? The socket wrench was just sitting around. I didn't have to think to myself, I have to do something to the socket wrench today so that tomorrow I could use it as a bottle opener, right? You could just do that. And the difference is rocks are not vessels. Rocks are not vessels. Rocks are rocks. Now, maybe these rocks weren't just rocks as the way they're found in nature. Maybe they had already been cut and shaped into building stones that, were like if you've ever been to Israel and seen the Western Wall, and you take the tour especially, I mean, those rocks were really large and shaped into beautiful, rectangles, all right? Three-dimensional rectangles. So if they're shaped, you might think, well, I mean, it's been formed into something. Isn't it some kind of utensil? It's a utensil for use in construction. No, it's not a utensil. But if the stones have been carefully shaped so that they'll fit in the building, so then maybe they're set aside for fear of financial loss. They don't want the builder, wants those stones to be exactly as he intended them so that they can go and make strong walls. And he doesn't want people using them on Shabbos for some other purpose that might result in the stones getting chipped or damaged. Okay. And so the takeaway from all of this is what? As I was saying at the beginning of our talk, it's about making Shabbos that sacred island in time. Or as the title of today's show, Shabbos is not just cessation. We don't just stop what we're doing. It's a celebration, right? Shabbos is the crown of creation. God made the whole universe in 6 days. And then the seventh day is not just a time when he stopped. That's not the only distinction of the seventh day. The seventh day is the crown over the creation when you get to step into the creation and enjoy it and relish what God has made for us and relish that we've been created and relish that we have people in our lives that we love and care about and relish that we've been given a seichel, a mind that can understand these concepts. And we can learn Torah on Shabbos. Of course we can learn, and we can pray, and we can sing, and we can eat, and we can celebrate everything that we've been setting up for. Because it's a celebration, just like if you were going to a wedding or if you were hosting a wedding, right? You wouldn't just say, yeah, we'll get married, when that day rolls around, and we'll just pick up whatever's available and do it, make some kind of a wedding. You plan for a wedding. You prepare for a wedding. You want that celebration, that wedding celebration, to be as great as it can possibly be. And likewise, Shabbos, we prepare for it, right? And some people start thinking about Shabbos on Saturday night, right? They're already thinking about the next Shabbos. And all week, you have a kind of Shabbos mentality of like, okay, when I get through this week, or even there was that movie, right? Thank God it's Friday. But think about it like, thank God it's Friday night. We slip into Shabbos because we can thank God, because we can enjoy all our blessings, because we can stop and think about where we are in this world and what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. And we really need to plan, prepare, and create that space in our lives. And that's why we have so many of these laws to make Shabbos distinct, sacred, and an island in time. All right, let me look at questions. Okay, Trina Harris from Kitchener, Ontario. I have missed your post since moving from LA, and suddenly you showed up in my feed again. I'm so glad you did. And we're actually, if you know anybody that you might think enjoys this, the algorithms of Facebook are such that not everybody sees us who wants to see us. It's just like we have such limited what shows up in our news feeds. So get the word out, my friends. Anyone that you think would enjoy this, let them know. We're going to try to do some, Facebook ads and things like that to also get the word out. But there's nothing as powerful as word of mouth. And there are people who would love to hear this and they just don't know about it. So you can help get the word to them. Spread the light. Bill Eldridge. That Facebook algorithm really is a pain. I recommend turning on notifications for when AT goes live. It's the only way I can be sure to never miss an episode myself. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Bill. And yes, turn on notifications so that you're notified when we go live. You could do it right there at Accidental Talmudist. And Nina's saying that in terms of today, if a Kohen violates one of the requirements that's on a priest, so for example, a Kohen, right, a Kohen, a descendant of Aaron the Kohen, Moses' brother, Aaron the Kohen. So one who is a Kohen is somebody who's a descendant of Aaron the Kohen. He has certain requirements that other Jews don't have. And one of them is he can't marry a divorcee. If he does, the marriage is valid. The children of the marriage are valid. But the Kohen has disqualified himself from serving in the temple. And even now when the temple doesn't stand, I'm being told here in the comments, he's disqualified from going up during holidays and doing the Kohanic blessing over the congregation. So that's something that a Kohen has to be aware of that others don't. Bill Eldridge says, but my cleaning cloth for my reading glasses happens to be below the minimum measure for a cloth scrap. Does that mean that if I were a Jew, I couldn't clean my reading glasses on Shabbos? You know, I thought about this, Bill, because it's 3 finger breadths, right? So it's a very small cloth. I mean, probably to clean your glasses, it's probably a little bit bigger. But let's say it's not. I think that that's a specialized cloth, which you certainly had in your mind to use for Shabbos. I think what we're talking about here is the assumption that would be made if you hadn't specifically prepared to use it. So, of course, you can use your cleaning cloth for your glasses. Lucy Rom Johnson, how about the broken oven that can be put over some food as a protective dome? A new use for that appliance. Can it then be moved? You know, I'm going to be honest, Lucy, I was a little confused by this. And I'm not sure the answer to your question, because it seems to me like, why not? Right? Why not? And I guess the problem is that it's not a vessel. But I think what it is if you had that use in mind before Shabbos began, then no problem. Right? Then no problem. For sure you could do that, because now for you, it's a vessel used to cover food. The question is, if you've got this broken oven that can't be used as an oven anymore, and it wasn't a vessel before, can it be repurposed? It seems like there's something exceptional about the oven. My understanding is not good enough to understand why. But the main thing here is that the oven is being set aside. It's not a vessel, and the law is a little different than the law of vessels. Lynn says, Shalom from North Texas, coming in minutes from the ending of the fast. This was another confusing daf, but grateful for it. Brandon Christian Sullivan says, if a package gets delivered on Shabbos and it's raining, and the package will be damaged if left out, is it permissible to bring the package inside, or is it still muktzeh? It's a really good question. You know, if we knew what was inside the package had a permitted Shabbos use, then yeah. But except it's new to us, right? It's arriving to us. So it's almost like it's not really prepared for use yet. Opening the package would almost be like striking the final blow, making it available to us. I'm not sure. I was looking at beer bottles. I'm going to have to take another look at the law of packages. I know we don't open packages on Shabbos. For sure we don't do that. But this idea of protecting the package from harm, I don't know. I have to look it up. Off the top of my head, if like we were together and you told me that there's something in that is like really a problem if it gets damaged, what I might say is, let's see if we can move it. First of all, not changing domains, but it's already in the private domain and we just want to slide it out of the rain. Maybe instead of picking it up in the normal way, we might move it in an atypical manner so that anyone who is watching would understand that we know we don't pick up packages on Shabbos. And we just want to get it, to a place where we're not going to suffer financial loss because of it. But I'm guessing there, and I don't have a good answer for you. Okay, Bill Eldridge says, now the question about rocks on barrels. There are methods of pickling that entail placing a heavy weight, usually a rock, on the pickling barrel. Is that still muktzeh, or do you have to get any pickles you want from that batch before Shabbos, or what? If you're telling me that the heavy weight on top of the barrel is serving the pickling process of what's going on in the barrel, so then it seems to me like that's the stone which is attached to the gourd, right? Now, both the heavy weight on top and the barrel are all serving the contents of the barrel. It's all about the pickles that are inside. So now we're just talking about lifting a very heavy lid so that I can get the pickles. That seems to me like it's okay. When we talked about the rock on the barrel and the barrel becomes a base and we can't move the barrel or the rock on top, it's because the rock really had no connection to the base other than the fact that it was just put there to rest for the sake of the rock, right? Something becomes a base for the muktzeh item when essentially the base is serving the rock. The base is just it's like a vessel for the rock. It's a base for the rock. But in your case, right, both the weight on top and the barrel itself are serving the contents of the barrel, which are the pickles. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. Hopefully we're really getting into that Shabbos mindset. I've said it 4 or 5 times, right? We are preparing for this sacred island in time when Shabbos comes up tomorrow. Sarah Stiffelman is reminding us that you can't open or tear the package. We know that. And the question is, can we just move the package out of the rain? That's what we have to look up. But let's tomorrow's Friday. So, and she says, I know that if it is in a field, you have to leave it. Well, sure, because then it's in the public domain, right? And then to move it to a place of shelter, you'd either have to bring it into the public domain or move it 4 cubits, both of which would be prohibited because of the law of carrying. The question is, if it's already on private property, can we just slide it, out of the rain? And maybe in that atypical manner, maybe we can. Okay, so let's focus, my friends. Tomorrow, when it's Friday, let's go a little extra. Let's do a little more to honor Shabbos and to be ready for Shabbos. Now, if you're not Jewish, you're actually prohibited from observing Shabbos in its entirety, right? And so that means that when somebody is converting to Judaism, during the conversion process, they'll always do like one little thing that is prohibited for a Jew to do to show that they acknowledge that they're not a Jew yet and Shabbos is not an obligation for them. But it is certainly possible to take on some of the concepts of Shabbos and to have that pause to reflect on our blessings and to spend a day, just enjoying God's creation, reflecting on how we can be the best version of ourselves, connecting with God, connecting with Torah, getting off of our screens. Get off it, right? And if you're Jewish, well, then you're obligated in this, so all the more. And on Friday, right? Friday is when we really got to think hard about that and prepare so that we can enter that space with that sweet relief of entering Shabbos. May we all be blessed to enter the island